I get the house and the business. She just gets the dolls." Sebastian's voice carried through the lawyer's office with such smug satisfaction that I wanted to hurl something at his perfectly styled head. The whole family erupted in laughter, as if my inheritance were some kind of elaborate joke. I sat there in my simple black dress, watching my brother bask in their approval while they dismissed everything I had built over the past decade. My name is Anna Wells, and I'm 32 years old. For the last 10 years, I've been the backbone of our family's construction company, Timber Construction, in Portland, Oregon. While Sebastian partied his way through college and then spent his 20s traveling the world on daddy's dime, I was grinding through 80-hour weeks, managing contracts, dealing with suppliers, and making sure our workers were paid on time. But apparently, none of that mattered to anyone in this mahogany-paneled office. Anna was always Daddy's little princess with her dollhouse collection, my Aunt Patricia chimed in, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue that hadn't caught a single tear. At least Sebastian understands business. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Sebastian? Understanding business? This was the man who had never set foot on a construction site, who couldn't tell a 2A4 from a steel beam, who thought profit margins were something you scribbled in the corner of a notebook. Still, I kept my face neutral and my hands folded in my lap. I had learned long ago that defending myself to this family was like trying to reason with a pack of wolves. "Well," Sebastian continued, straightening his expensive tie, "I suppose Anna can keep playing with her toys while I handle the real responsibilities. Father always said the business needed strong leadership." The lawyer, Mr. Harrison, cleared his throat softly. An elderly man with kind eyes, he had known our family for decades. Something in his expression made me sit up straighter, a flicker of anticipation sparking in my chest. "Actually," Mr. Harrison said, his voice slicing through their laughter like a knife through butter, "the company was never in his name." The room fell silent so suddenly I could hear the air conditioning humming through the vents. Sebastian's face shifted from triumphant to bewildered in the span of a heartbeat, and I felt something warm, sharp, and dangerous spread through my chest. After years of being dismissed, overlooked, and branded the family disappointment, I sensed the tables were about to turn in a way none of them could possibly imagine. Growing up as the youngest Wells child meant learning early that my opinions barely registered. My father, Thomas Wells, was a bear of a man who built his construction company from nothing, just a single truck and a handful of tools. My mother, Caroline, passed away when I was 12, leaving me to navigate the testosterone-heavy world of construction sites and boardroom meetings without much guidance. Sebastian, 5 years older and the golden boy, was always destined for greatness in everyone's eyes. He played football in high school, dated the homecoming queen, and cruised through business school with mediocre grades that people insisted were brilliant. Meanwhile, I spent my teenage years on job sites, learning the difference between types of concrete and why solid foundations mattered more than glossy finishes. "Anna's got a good head for numbers," my father used to tell people, as if mathematical ability were a parlor trick instead of a vital business skill. "She keeps me organized." But it was more than that. And deep down, I think he knew it. When Sebastian graduated college and announced he wanted to find himself on a year-long backpacking trip through Europe, I was the one who stepped up. When our biggest client threatened to cancel $1 million contract over communication failures, I was the one who salvaged the deal. And when we nearly lost 3 key employees to a competitor, I restructured our benefits package and convinced them to stay. I had learned to read architectural blueprints, navigate zoning laws, and negotiate with union representatives. I could walk onto any job site and, within minutes, spot safety violations, quality issues, or scheduling problems. Sebastian, meanwhile, had set foot on exactly 2 construction sites in his entire life, and both times he'd complained about getting his shoes dirty. "Sebastian will take over when I retire," my father would say at family gatherings, and everyone would nod approvingly. He's got the Wells leadership gene. What they saw as leadership, I recognized as laziness dressed up with charm. Sebastian could wine and dine clients at expensive restaurants, but he couldn't read a contract to save his life. He looked sharp in a suit and spoke with confidence about synergy and market positioning. Yet he had no idea what it actually cost to pour a foundation or frame a house. Still, I kept working. I kept solving problems, managing crises, and building relationships with suppliers and subcontractors. I told myself that one day my contributions would be acknowledged, that the family would finally see how much I had sacrificed for the business we all claimed to love. Looking back now, sitting in that lawyer's office with everyone staring at Mr. Harrison in stunned silence, I realized my father had probably seen it all along. The question was whether he had done something about it. The night my father died, 3 months before this moment in the lawyer's office, I was the one holding his hand in the hospital room. Sebastian was in Miami at some conference that sounded more like a vacation, and by the time he flew back, the funeral arrangements were already made. "You've been my right hand all these years," my father whispered during one of his lucid moments in those final days. "You understand this business better than anyone." I squeezed his hand and told him not to worry about work, that everything would be fine. But there was something in his eyes, a weight, as if he wanted to say more. He kept glancing at his briefcase in the corner, the same one that never left his side during business hours. "Anna," he said at last, his voice so faint I had to lean in to hear him. "The dolls. Your grandmother's collection. It's not just about sentiment." At the time, I thought he meant their emotional value. My grandmother's dolls had been passed down for generations, and though I had always found them slightly unsettling, I respected their history. They were beautiful antiques, some dating back to the 1800s, crafted by artisans whose work had become increasingly rare. But now, watching Mr. Harrison shuffle through his papers with deliberate care, I began to wonder if there had been layers to my father's words that I hadn't understood. "The business ownership?" Sebastian demanded, his voice cracking slightly. "What do you mean it was never in his name?" Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses and pulled a thick folder from his briefcase. "Your father transferred ownership of timber construction to Anna 5 years ago. She has been the legal owner of the company since then, though the transition was kept confidential at Mr. Wells's request." The air in the room seemed to thicken. My heart pounded against my ribs, but I kept my expression composed. 5 years ago, while Sebastian had been off in Thailand exploring his spiritual side, I had been managing the largest contract in our company's history. "That's impossible," Sebastian blurted, though his voice lacked conviction. "I'm his son. I'm supposed to inherit the business." "The will you are inheriting today pertains only to Mr. Wells's personal assets," Mr. Harrison explained evenly. "The house, his personal investments, and various family heirlooms. The business has belonged to Anna since 2019. I finally allowed myself the smallest smile. Around me, I saw the family exchange bewildered glances, their earlier celebration curdling into unease. Sebastian's face had gone pale, and for the first time in my adult life, he was looking at me with something that might have been respect. Or maybe it was fear. "This has to be some kind of mistake," Sebastian insisted, his voice climbing toward desperation. "Anna doesn't know anything about running a company. She's just the bookkeeper." The words struck like a physical blow, but instead of anger, I felt something colder settle inside me, calm, sharp, calculating. After 10 years of being dismissed as just the bookkeeper, the moment of truth had finally arrived. I watched Sebastian's face cycle through disbelief, anger, and the first flickers of panic as the reality of his situation began to sink in. "I assure you there's no mistake," Mr. Harrison said, pulling out a legal document thick enough to serve as a doorstop. Ms. Wells has been the sole owner and operator of Timber Construction since September 15, 2019. Your father made this transfer to protect the business from potential creditors and to ensure continuity of operations under experienced management. Experienced management. The phrase tasted sweet on my tongue, even though I hadn't spoken it aloud. For years, I had endured Sebastian talking over me in meetings, taking credit for projects I had carried from blueprint to ribbon cutting, and delivering condescending lectures on business concepts I had mastered before he could balance a checkbook. "But I went to business school," Sebastian protested, as if a degree could outweigh a decade of actual leadership. "I have an MBA from Portland State with a 2.8 GPA," I said quietly, my voice steady as I spoke for the first time since Mr. Harrison's revelation. "In a program you dragged out over 5 years because you kept taking semesters off to find yourself." The room froze. Aunt Patricia's mouth fell open. My cousin Jake dropped his coffee cup. It clattered across the hardwood floor, forgotten by everyone. "Anna," my stepmother Diane snapped, "that's no way to speak to your brother." "You're right," I replied, rising from my chair for the first time since we'd entered the office. "I should use his proper title." I turned toward Sebastian. "Sebastian, as the owner of Timber Construction, I want to formally thank you for your years of minimal contribution to our company's success." His hands trembled as my words sank in. The so-called golden boy, who had been handed everything in life, was finally staring down a reality where his charm and connections couldn't save him. "This is ridiculous," he stammered, though the usual confidence had drained from his voice. "Father would never." "He knew I was going to take over. We talked about it all the time." "You talked about it," I corrected. "He listened. There's a difference." Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, diplomatic as ever. "Perhaps I should explain the full scope of the transfer. Ms. Wells, your father was very thorough in his documentation. Would you like me to continue reading the details?" I nodded, settling back into my chair. For the first time in years, I felt exactly where I belonged. Around me, the family sat in stunned silence, their earlier laughter replaced by disbelief as they struggled to comprehend just how completely they had misread the situation. The transfer included all business assets, contracts, equipment, and intellectual property, Mr. Harrison continued. Ms. Wells also assumed all business debts and obligations, which she has managed successfully for the past 5 years. Under her leadership, the company's value has increased by approximately 40%. Sebastian made a choking sound. When I glanced at him, his complexion had shifted from pale to a sickly green. 40% growth wasn't luck or coincidence. It was the product of careful planning, strategic investments, and countless 18-hour days he had never once bothered to acknowledge. "Now," Mr. Harrison said, "shall we continue with the personal estate distribution?" The reading of the personal estate felt like watching a slow-motion car crash. Sebastian inherited the family house, which sounded impressive until Mr. Harrison mentioned the outstanding $300,000 mortgage attached to it. He also received my father's personal investments, assets that had been drained over the years to fund Sebastian's failed business ventures and endless vacations. "The antique doll collection," Mr. Harrison announced next, "goes to Anna, along with all associated documentation and appraisals." Sebastian let out a laugh that sounded more like a bark than anything resembling humor. "See? I told you she gets the dolls. At least some things make sense." I kept my face neutral, but inside I was humming with anticipation. My father's cryptic words, that the dolls were not just about sentiment, were beginning to make perfect sense. During those last days, he had mentioned documentation and appraisals. At the time, I'd brushed them off as details. Now, they felt like the key to something much larger. "Mr. Harrison," I said carefully, "could you elaborate on the appraisals?" The elderly lawyer's smile deepened, and I caught a flash of mischief in his eyes. "Certainly." Your grandmother's collection consists of 47 pieces, including several rare Jumeau dolls from the 1870s and a complete set of early Madame Alexander collectibles. The most recent appraisal, completed just last year, valued the collection at $512,000. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear someone's stomach growl. Sebastian's laughter died mid-breath, his face frozen in the expression of a man who had just realized he'd been playing checkers while everyone else had been playing chess. $500,000, Aunt Patricia whispered. For dolls? Antique dolls are serious investments, Mr. Harrison explained. Ms. Wells's great-grandmother began the collection in the 1920s, and each subsequent generation added carefully selected pieces. Your father was particularly proud of Anna's knowledge of the collection's history and value. I had always been the one who listened to my grandmother's stories, who helped her research the dolls' origins and preserve their condition. While Sebastian rolled his eyes and cracked jokes about creepy old toys, I had been learning about craftsmanship, historical significance, and market appreciation. So let me understand this, Sebastian said slowly, his voice tight with barely contained panic. Anna gets a business worth millions plus $500,000 in antiques, and I get a house with a massive mortgage? You also get father's car, Diane offered weakly, as though a 10-year-old pickup truck might somehow balance the scales. The timber construction company, Mr. Harrison added, consulting his notes, was appraised at $2.3 million as of last month. Ms. Wells has been managing the company's finances, operations, and strategic planning for the past 5 years while maintaining her position as majority owner. I watched Sebastian do the math in his head, his face shifting through shades of disbelief, realization, and defeat. $2.3 million for the business, $500,000 for the dolls, and, most satisfying of all, the recognition I had been denied for over a decade. Meanwhile, he was left with a house he couldn't afford to maintain and a pickup truck that needed a new transmission. This can't be legal, he said desperately. There has to be something we can do. Anna tricked him somehow. Actually, I said, rising once more and smoothing down my skirt. I think it's time I explained exactly how this happened. I began, savoring the way everyone leaned forward despite themselves. 5 years ago, Sebastian was in Thailand, finding his spiritual center, while I was managing the Patterson Heights development project. You remember that one, don't you, Sebastian? The $20 million contract that nearly collapsed because of permitting issues. Sebastian's eyes darted around the room, searching for support that wasn't there. Everyone remembered the Patterson Heights project. It was the crown jewel of our company's history, the success story that had put timber construction on the map. I spent 3 months working with city planners, environmental consultants, and zoning committees to resolve problems that could have cost us everything, I continued. And while I was doing that, our lawyer discovered that one of our subcontractors was preparing to file a lawsuit that might have bankrupted us. Mr. Harrison gave a solemn nod. Your father was facing potential personal liability that could have extended to his private assets, including the family home. So he called me into his office, I said, the memory as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. He told me he had been watching me handle increasingly complex responsibilities, and he wanted to protect both the business and the family. The solution was to transfer ownership to someone who actually understood the company's operations. But why didn't he tell us? Diane asked, her voice softer now, stripped of its earlier edge. Because he knew exactly how you would react, I replied. The same way you're reacting now, with shock that Anna could possibly be capable of running something more complicated than a lemonade stand. Sebastian finally found his voice. This is insane. You can't just give away a multi-million-dollar company without discussing it with the family. He didn't give it away, I said, letting steel edge into my voice for the first time. I earned it. Every 18-hour day, every crisis I solved, every relationship I built with our clients and suppliers. While you were posting Instagram photos from beach resorts, I was making sure our workers had jobs to come back to. I pulled out my own folder, the one I had brought just in case, though I hadn't expected to use it. I have 5 years of financial records showing the company's growth under my management. I have testimonials from clients, suppliers, and employees. I have documentation of every major decision I've made and every problem I've solved. Mr. Harrison raised his brows, clearly impressed. Your father told me you were thorough, but I didn't realize you had compiled such comprehensive records. I learned early that in this family you need to document everything if you want anyone to believe you actually did it, I said, glancing deliberately at Sebastian. Too many times I watched someone else take credit for my work. The room fell silent again, but this silence felt different. No longer the stunned hush of people processing a surprise. It was the uneasy quiet of people realizing they had been wrong all along. So what happens now? Sebastian asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked at my brother, the man who had spent 37 years coasting on charm and family connections, who had never once questioned his right to inherit everything our father had built. For a fleeting moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Now, I said, you figure out how to make your own way in the world, just like I did. I gathered my papers and stood, ready to leave the office where I had just been confirmed as one of the wealthiest young women in Portland. But before I reached the door, I turned back one last time. Oh, and Sebastian, I said lightly, the business isn't hiring right now. The aftermath of the will reading was everything I had dreamed of, and more. Sebastian stumbled out of Mr. Harrison's office looking like he had been hit by a freight train, while Aunt Patricia and Diane whispered furiously in the hallway about unfair surprises and ungrateful children. I walked past them with my head held high, carrying the folder that contained 5 years of documentation proving I had earned every penny of my inheritance. Anna, wait! Sebastian called after me as I reached the elevator. His voice had lost all its earlier arrogance, replaced by something that sounded almost like desperation. We need to talk about this. I turned to face him, noting how his expensive suit suddenly looked cheap and his perfectly styled hair had fallen flat. What exactly do you want to talk about, Sebastian? How you never once asked about my work? How you assumed you deserved to inherit a business you never bothered to understand? Or maybe how you just spent the last hour insulting my intelligence in front of our entire family? He opened his mouth, then closed it again, realizing any answer would only dig him deeper. You know what the funny thing is? I said, stepping into the elevator. I actually would have been willing to work with you. If you had ever shown even a shred of respect for what I do, or taken 5 minutes to learn about the business, we could have been partners. But you were too busy being handed everything to notice someone else was doing all the work. The elevator doors began to slide shut. Sebastian made a half-hearted attempt to step forward, but I held up my hand. Don't, I said firmly. You made your choice a long time ago. You chose to treat me like I was invisible, like my contributions didn't matter. Now you get to live with the consequences. As the elevator descended, I caught a glimpse of his reflection in the polished metal doors. Sebastian standing alone in the hallway, surrounded by family members who now looked at him with the same mixture of disappointment and pity they had once reserved for me. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my newly redecorated office at Timber Construction headquarters, reviewing expansion plans that would have been impossible under Sebastian's so-called leadership. The nameplate on my desk, Anna Wells, owner and chief executive officer, still sent a little thrill through me every time I saw it. A knock sounded at the door. My assistant peeked in. Ms. Wells, there's a Sebastian Wells here to see you. He says he's your brother. I looked up from the architectural blueprint spread across the conference table. Through my office window, I could see our newest construction site, a sustainable housing development set to be featured in next month's Portland Business Journal. The project was my design, my vision, and my responsibility. "Send him in," I said. Sebastian walked into my office looking like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair uncombed, and his posture defeated, like someone who had finally run out of options. "Nice office," he muttered, though there was no real appreciation in his tone. "I heard you're expanding into green construction." "We are," I replied, not bothering to stand or offer him a chair. "It's a growing market, and we're positioned to be regional leaders in sustainable building practices." He nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the awards on my walls, the photos of completed projects, the architectural certificates I had earned while he was busy traveling the world. "Anna," he said at last, "I need a job." The words hung in the air like an unexpected echo. And in that moment, I realized this was what I had been unconsciously waiting for. Sebastian Wells, the golden boy who had never worked a day in his life, asking his little sister for employment. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "But we're not hiring." Sebastian's life unraveled quickly after the will reading. Word spread fast through Portland's business community about the dramatic reversal of fortune at Timber Construction. His reputation as a rising business leader collapsed when it became clear he had expected to inherit a company his sister had been running for years. His lack of real experience was glaring when he tried to find work in construction or development firms that knew the Wells family history. The family house became a burden he couldn't manage, forcing him to take a job as a sales associate at a car dealership while struggling to cover the mortgage on a property he had no hope of keeping. Within 6 months, he moved into a small apartment, watching from the sidelines as I expanded the company he had always taken for granted. As I signed the contract for our 4th major expansion project, I reflected on how Sebastian's years of mockery had inadvertently prepared me for this moment. His constant dismissal of my abilities had forced me to document every success, prove every point, and build the kind of bulletproof track record that made my ownership indisputable when the truth came out. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't loud or cruel. It's simply letting people discover, in the harshest way possible, that the person they underestimated was the one in control all along.